going to ask my friends to come join me up here. You know who you are. I mean, if you all come up, that would be like really weird. But the two that I have specifically talked to in advance, how's that? And they're going to join me and they're going to help me this morning on this topic that we're going to discuss. And we're back in our series I'm just getting my water. No, I'm good. On things we don't talk about, which actually are things that we are going to talk about and have been talking about here at Cross Point. And this morning, we're going to talk on a subject of mental illness. And I have two friends here that are going to help me because I need help with this, and they're going to speak from a perspective that I can't. And we all have that, right? We all have our own aspects and our own personal journey that can help us relate and share things that other people don't have. And this morning, in preparing for this, even weeks ago, when I was like, God, what's your heart on this topic of mental illness? And what exactly do you want me to share? Because how many know we could do a 6-part series on this topic alone? At least. And we still probably wouldn't cover it. And we have one, 30-minute kind of shot for now. And there's so many ways we could go, and we're not going to hit all of them. So guaranteed you're going to leave today and be like, well, they did not say this. And I know that about it. Yeah, I know. We're not going to say everything. We're going to hit a tiny, tiny fraction. But what I do know is the direction that the Father wants to go. And he said, Renee, what I want to do is heal. Heal. So that's where we're going to go. So they're going to share a little bit of their journey through the tough times, through the healing times. And I'm going to kind of talk in the middle of all that. But it's really important for us as a church family to begin to talk about these things. And especially this of mental illness. It's prevalent. The struggle is real within our churches and within our cities. And it's because it's not talked about, often people who are struggling, or if you know someone, they're kind of kept a little hidden. And maybe forced to put on masks that they should never have to put on. What we want to do is create a safe haven where people can struggle and can walk it out together as a family and be okay with that. And I'm okay with that, and you're okay with that. And it's not awkward and it's not uncomfortable, but it's family and it's necessary. We struggle with how to struggle in the church. And I just want to put this out there this morning, that you are free to struggle here. And you are free to hurt, and you're free to be vulnerable enough to find the help and healing that you need. There's no prescribed way for you to handle this. It's just within love. And there is no fear in love, and those are some of the things we're going to talk about. At times with mental illness, especially in the church, it's been prevalent to say that this is the why and this is the reason and all those things. And I don't like that, because there are streams that says if you struggle with mental illness, or if you know someone who does, then it's punishment from God, or it's because of this in your life. And that's just not true. So if you've heard that, or if you've felt that or wondered that, I just want to kind of start with just lay that down, push that aside. That is not the heart of God here. And I know there's everything from a fear to bipolar and everything in between in this subject of mental disorders and of the mind and things like that. But God doesn't put these things on us to punish, as a result of sin or anything like that. The reason that we struggle with this is because of our broken world. Okay? So that's kind of the premise for where we are It's a spiritual problem, yes. It's a natural problem, yes. But it's not one or the other. It's both. Okay? And just another one thing. The Bible and medicine are not enemies, but they work together. You're welcome. There are many examples in the Bible, and I'm not going to go through them all this morning because I want to give these ladies a chance to share from their hearts. But there are many examples, if I believe, of people who struggled with mental illness, probably. It doesn't state it outright, but it infers it. And there was, I think of one, and as soon as I say that, you're going to be like, oh, that was a physical thing. But the woman with the issue of blood. And I'm not saying she did, but I'm saying that there very well could have been. Although she had a physical ailment for 12 years, can you imagine going through something for 12 years, day in and day out, trying to get the help you need, but only finding hopelessness, the struggle in your mind that you would have to work through. And even that time when she found Jesus in the crowd and that was pressing in, if you read in the original language, it says that she said and kept on saying, if I could only touch, if I could only touch, if I could only touch, if I could only touch. Her mind was going rampant of all the things that she'd been through in the last 12 years. And now if I could only get there, I could be healed. There was King Saul, who showed potential indications of being bipolar. If you read the story of his life at all, he would actually call for David to come in and play the harp because he had these thoughts that would go in his mind on a continual basis, and it just helped him keep some peace. And even one time in the scripture, it says when he did have David there playing the harp, he still got enraged in his thoughts and hurled a spear at him, trying to pin him to the wall. Jonah, if you read about Jonah, he was a very troubled man. In Jonah chapter 2, verse 5-7, he says, I sank beneath the waves and the waters closed over me. This was when he was in the whale. Seaweed wrapped itself around my head. I sank down to the very roots of the mountains. I was imprisoned in the earth, whose gates lock shut forever. But you, O Lord my God, snatched me from the jaws of death. And that was a physical situation that he was in, but also, I believe, explained the innermost depths of despair that he was feeling on the inside as he was called to go in one direction, but headed in the other. Our emotional and mental health will impact our yes to God. God isn't worried about it, but we do. And it impacts it. Psalms 23 goes through walking through those deep, and if you read it in the Amplified, it says the deep and sunless valley of the shadow of death. It says, I will fear no evil or hurt or trouble or affliction, for your rod, and the rod is indication of our protection, and your staff is indication of support and guidance. He says, will guide us, will keep us on the track, and they put us at ease. See, we all struggle from time to time, but there's some of us that it's more than that. Like Liv, we were talking earlier, and you talked about there's normal, normal people anxiety, and then there's when there's something a little deeper. There's something a little more that we struggle through. But the peace of God is what can intervene in your situation and get you through. Isaiah 26 verse 3 says, you will guard him. Keep him in perfect and constant peace, whose mind is stayed on you. God's not concerned about your well-being because he has your well-being taken care of. So what I mean by that is he's concerned about you, but he's not concerned that you're not going to be okay. He's not concerned that you're not going to be able to handle something or that you're not going to be able to fulfill the destiny on your life. because he has your life in the palm of his hand. And this morning, the goal, the dream, I believe, of the Father is for you to experience healing, but also an open door for you to walk out your healing, for those of you who've been suffering in silence. I'm going to pass over the microphone here in a moment to, we're going to start with Shelby. And Shelby has grown up in a home where her mom suffered with a mental illness her whole life, pretty much. So she's going to share from that perspective and just about the struggle and the pain and all that entailed in that.
Good morning. A little bit of detail about my mom. She is one of 8 children. When she was 3 years old, her father actually committed suicide. So her home was not, it was anything but functional. It was very dysfunctional. That was what she grew up in. My grandmother was not a very stable woman. She herself struggled with depression and insecurity and things. As my mom grew up, she also struggled with insecurity, even dating my dad in high school. So she was never quite there, if I can explain it that way, and I don't mean any disrespect. A lot of people struggle with insecurity. I know I did as a teenager. But hers was a little different. And so as my parents got married, they got married when they were 23 and 24. And they were married 3 years before I came along. And life was okay. It was functional. I had a good thing happening, newly married. And then I came along when they were married for about 3 years. And my mom, she basically, she had postpartum, and the doctors were like, oh, it'll go away. Well, time went on, and it didn't go away. And basically what had happened, it developed into this chemical imbalance that was later diagnosed as schizophrenia. And so she was not well after I was born. They were trying to figure things out through doctor's visits and medication. And so this was basically my whole life, so I never knew my mother mentally sound. And we had some good years, but overall I didn't ever know her that way. So growing up like that was interesting. In my early years, when I was very little, so these are stories told from my dad, she actually tried on, I believe it was 2 different occasions at least, to take her own life. One time my parents were driving on the street, and my mom had this famous phrase we learned in our house while we were growing up, and she would simply say, I've got to go. And what that meant was something was triggered, something was happening, and we needed to change something. So she was driving with my dad down the street, and she looked at him, and she said, I've got to go. And she opened the car door and attempted to jump out. And my father leaped, and she had a very thick leather belt on, and leaped and grabbed her by her belt and pulled her back into the car before she could fall to the pavement. On another occasion, they were in the kitchen, and same thing. My dad could tell something wasn't quite right. And she looked at him and said, John, I've got to go. And she grabbed a knife out of the butcher block, and she stabbed herself in the chest 3 times before he could get to her. When he got to her, there was no wounds on her whatsoever. But she did attempt. I believe another story, actually, is that she jumped out of a 2nd-story window because she had to go. So growing up with that, even though a lot of that was more when we were very little, didn't actually experience it visually ourselves. We heard the stories and we knew that mom wasn't well. And it created a lot of fear and anxiety as a kid. And fear to the point where when my dad would go to work, and this was back in the time of pagers, there were no cell phones. So if I knew what time my dad got off work and I knew what time he was supposed to be home, and if he wasn't home on the nose, I was like blasting his pager. I would just sit and look out the window and be like, Dad, you've got to come home. And my greatest fear was that he wouldn't come home, that he would get in a car accident, that he would not be okay, that something physically would happen to him. He would go out in the evenings for a school board meeting, and I would like freak out. And coming home from school, we never quite knew what we were going to get. Was mom going to be asleep on the couch from medication, or was she going to just kind of be going around the house doing her thing? And it created a real sense of fear in our lives that took until I was an adult and married myself, actually, for Jesus to break off my life. So, that's a little bit about what that looked like.
I have an uncle, and this uncle of mine was a real role model in our family. And my mom is one of 12 children, and this is one of her brothers. And he was like he was like the patriarch of the family, and just loved Jesus. And I mean, all the brothers and sisters, all the nieces and nephews, all the grandkids, they all looked to this man, my Uncle Ford. And all my life, I was like, wow, like he was just such a role model for me. And after my dad died, I really looked to him and turned to him as a father figure in my life. And he really fulfilled that role in many occasions for me and for Craig and I after we got married. Not that long ago, within the last couple of years, we had a tragedy in our family with my uncle. And my uncle was of sound mind his whole life. So unlike Shelby's story, where it was kind of like an ongoing thing, my uncle was fine his whole life. And then he went on a vacation, and he had a physical injury. And this physical injury just got worse, and he came back and he went to the doctor, and it just wasn't getting better and wasn't getting better. And he went from a place of like, very athletic and for his age and things, like he was outgoing, and he wasn't in full-time ministry his whole life, but in the last few years in his retirement, he was like full-time pastor at a church. And he had this physical problem, and that just kept getting worse and worse, and nothing could help it. And because of this, he began to be isolated in his home. And the isolation and away from people and the hopelessness of not being able to get better really began to attack his mind. And it happened so fast, and people didn't even know what was going on. There was little indications, but it's almost like before we were all fully aware that there was a real mental kind of problem happening here, he left one morning his home, and from what we can tell, made it to this river kind of lake area that he would used to go and spend time with Jesus, and tragically ended his life because of these voices and this hopelessness and this thing that got in his mind that took over the ability for him to think clearly enough to reach out for help. And these are just some of the stories, and I'm sure you guys have your own, but just to share from my perspective of something that our family has even gone through in the past couple years. Now I know what you're thinking. You're like, wow, there's not a lot of hope here this morning. You're giving us all the bad stories. And here's why I'm going to pass the mic over to Liv now, because she's going to share something that she's gone through recently, but then how God has kind of stepped in and done some things in her life.
Hi, everyone. I'm super nervous, transparency. So if I get shaky, just forgive me. I'm going to try to get everything out that I can, because as Renee was saying, there's so much we could talk about. There's so much we could all share. But basically, so I have an anxiety disorder. Basically, I have struggled with anxiety and a little bit of depression for as long as I can remember. I think maybe first memories are probably middle school, more of high school. But I didn't know it was an anxiety disorder. I didn't know there was actually something wired not as it should be in my mind until like 4 years ago-ish, when I first started going to therapy, when Blake and I first got married. And so that's when I first kind of started working on it, because in your 20s, that's kind of when anxiety can really surface, or any mental illness can surface typically. And so that's when I kind of started working on it. And then 2017, last year, it just blew up. Like, it got so debilitating and crippling. I think a lot due to some traumas that happened in 2016, but just who knows? Like, the mind is crazy. It just happens. So I really describe it as it went up and down, up and down. And so it would get really, really bad. I started having more panic attacks, like weekly, a couple times a week, and then they would get better. But then the anxiety would come back, and it would stay longer, and the panic attacks would get longer. And every single time it kind of left, it came back stronger and with a vengeance. And I was getting prayed over. I was getting words. I was in worship and feeling God's love and healing, but it wasn't getting better. It was getting worse. And I felt shame because what's wrong with me that I'm getting prayer and like all these healing words spoken over me, but nothing's happening. And so that breeds shame, that breeds guilt. And sort of a numbness towards God, towards church, to where I couldn't really even come to church sometimes. I remember one Sunday I just drove to the beach and sat there for like 3 hours, and I felt peace there. But yeah, it was really, and thoughts of anger and doubt and why isn't this going away? I've gotten all these prophetic words. You're made for this. You're made for this. You're going to have victory. Blah, blah, blah. Like, not to discount that, but it wasn't happening. And so, kind of fast forward a little bit, it got a little bit better. And then it got to the point where in December, I had the worst panic attack of my life I've ever had. It was about 4 or 5 hours long. I know people have had longer, and it sucks. But it was about 4 or 5 hours long. I couldn't calm myself down. I was telling Blake, I've got to go to the hospital. I have to go to urgent care. I felt like I was dying, not just physically, but my mind was in this dark place, and I couldn't see any light. I couldn't get out of it. It was the worst thing I've ever gone through. So because of that, I thought maybe I'd just finally go to sleep and I would wake up and I'd be okay. Because that's kind of how it had happened before. But this was so bad that it like rewired or triggered something in my mind that just set forth just being laid out with anxiety for a few weeks. And during that first week, I couldn't even describe it. I kind of think of it as like, this is what hell is like, because I just was panicking up here in anxiety the whole time. Just crying. I didn't want to live my life. I didn't get to a point where I was going to commit suicide, but I just felt like I don't want to live. Like, I don't want to live if this is how my life is going to be. And so thank God I had friends that had gone through sort of the same thing, and I was reaching out to sort of, just kind of telling them what was going on. And I ended up going to urgent care that first week. So the panic attack was on Sunday night. I went to urgent care Tuesday or Wednesday. They gave me a lorazepam to calm me down, and I finally kind of felt normal. And then they gave me like a bottle of Xanax to be calm, which I still have. Haven't taken them all, but it's a nice little like helper if I need it. So that Friday, I ended up going to the doctors because I had talked to a couple of friends that had been through the same thing. And they said, it might be time to go get professional help, like go to the doctor, see what they can do for you. And so I did, and my mom took me, and even that was really hard, just getting out of the house. Because at this point, trying not to ramble, but at this point, I was not even getting out of bed. I was scared to take a shower. I wasn't eating. I could barely even get water down. I was not functional. And so to go to the doctor was really hard. But my mommy took me and talked to the doctor, and he prescribed me a medicine that I'm on right now, and I have been since December, and it changed my life around. So the next couple of weeks were still kind of bad. Basically, I was getting a little bit more and more functional. The third week really was when I was able to like even step outside of my house and like go to my parents' house, play with the dogs, do little things that weren't going to trigger anything. So I went back to work, was on that medicine, and kind of going into the breakthrough of it is that I'm still feeling these negative, not right now, but in this point in the story, I'm still feeling these negative feelings of shame, of guilt, of numbness towards God, sometimes angry, not wanting to come to church, because it got to the point where coming to church was a trigger for me, where I had panic attacks before worship. Even if I was just background vocals, stepping into the church would trigger my brain because that's what my body learned. And so it was scary to come even back to church after all of that. But I did it. And it was the first or second Sunday I was back after all of this happened that I wasn't feeling it. Like, I knew God was there. Like, I knew God is for me. But I'm sure, like, some of you or all of you have felt where, like, you know it, but you don't feel it. And so that's where I was, and still struggling, like, with those things I talked about before. And so I was just like, okay, I'm going to stand. I'm just going to sing, because sometimes you have to sing until you feel something. And I remember Jordan was leading, I forget what the song's called, but the line is, "You can have it all, Lord, every part of my world." And so clearly, I just heard God say, I want all of you. I want all of your world, even the doubts, even when you don't believe. And that really got me, because God met me with grace and not shame. He met me that's why I felt like singing today. Like, you take it all, you take it all. You take every single part, even when I doubt you, even when I don't believe, even when I feel numb against you. You still want me, and you still take it all. You still want it all. And there was something else I was going to say, but I can't remember. But basically, that broke through a lot, because it wasn't like an instant radical change. It was just, okay, like, I'm safe with you. I'm safe with God. There's no shame. I am valid. I am worthy. There's nothing wrong with me. There's something wrong in how my brain is wired, but there's nothing wrong with me, and I can come to you just as I am, which is the simplest principle of Christianity, coming to God just as you are. But when you experience it in that type of setting, when you've experienced, so much shame and guilt, it just expels it. It just wipes it away. And so what I really hope for people is that you're not alone. That you're not meant for isolation. You are not meant to hide this. You're not meant to put on a mask, like Renee was saying. There is so much grace for you. You are so valued. You are so loved just as you are. You are not less than. And just in those moments when God was speaking that to me, that's what I felt. And I still struggle with those feelings, but I remember that. And just, again, really quick, something else I can say to touch on what Renee was saying is prayer and healing and, the miraculous that happens in the church and medicine and psychotherapy are not mutually exclusive. There are so many ways of healing that God provides. And one great thing that I remember, my dad was in the Navy for 24 years. And when he got out of the Navy, he did some things. And then he went to school to become a therapist. And it feels really random, but I remember having this just revelation that God knew me. God knew the struggle we're in right now with mental illness and these things that are rampant in our culture. That he provides all of these things. He provides the minds and the science for medication. He provides the compassion and the minds for therapists. And so what I'm saying specifically is that I don't think it's a coincidence, and I don't think it was just for my dad or for them, my mom and dad, for a career, that he became a therapist. I don't think that's just for his well-being or for his career. I think God knew where my struggle was going to be, and he knew that my dad could help me. That I could talk through all of these things with him, and that he would understand, and he'd provide me with books and resources and things. And that is incredible. What a beautiful gift. Because 24 years in the Navy and then you become a therapist, that's so random. But I truly believe, there are just so many ways of healing. So that's part of my story.
I'm going to give her the mic back in a few minutes, so. That's crazy. I didn't know that about your dad, but that's just crazy. Like, the Father is so good, and his destinies for our lives, and wow, it's just, man, things like that come about, and you're just like, what? But you're like, yeah, seems about right. See, Jesus doesn't leave us abandoned. He doesn't leave us in isolation. He knew from the beginning of time, before Liv was even fashioned together, which she was fashioned together for a purpose. He knew that this was going to happen, and he knew about her dad, and he had it all put together in this beautiful masterpiece of her life and her family. And he doesn't leave any of us abandoned or isolated. Even when Jesus, he walked this earth and he dealt with mental illness every day when he went and he was distributing healing. He dealt with it. But when he went away, when he went back to the Father, he's like, I'm not going to leave you alone, but I'm going to leave you with Holy Spirit. So we're never left abandoned. We're never left in silos. We're never left just to figure it out on your own. It's not, he places us in family, and in the destiny that's found in the context of family. And it's a beautiful thing. And I'm so thankful for that. In John 14, talking about that and about leaving the Holy Spirit, verse 27, he says, I'm telling you these things while I'm still living with you. This is Jesus. But the friend, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send at my request, will make everything plain to you. He will remind you of all the things I've told you. And then he said this, Jesus says this, I'm leaving you well and whole. He was talking to his people, but we're his people. I'm leaving you well and whole, and that's my parting gift to you. Peace. I don't leave you the way you're used to being left, feeling abandoned. So don't be upset and don't be distraught. And that's the hope we have in Jesus. And that's the hope we have in Holy Spirit. And that's the hope we have in family. And that's the hope we have here today. And it's what the Father wants to do. I'm going to ask Shelby now to share kind of the flip side of her story. She kind of shared the struggle, but there's more to this story.
Yeah, before I get into that, I just want to say, Liv, you're so brave. And you know what? What you just did this morning was you took power away from the kingdom of darkness because you spoke it out. So, yeah, well done. The other thing I want people to understand is that awkward situation, that awkward text that might come in from a friend, or that awkward moment with a family member where they're just not quite right, and it's easier for us to retreat than it is to push in. Just know that their torment is way, way worse than our awkwardness for that minute that lasts. And if we will just remember that, we'll live with compassion and we'll love the right way. We saw a lot of that growing up. But to share the struggles and the fear and stuff, almost, to be honest, is like harder for me to talk about than it is the good stuff, because I'm 37, so my mom was sick a long, long time. And we prayed, and we prayed, and we prayed, and we believed, and we believed, and we believed. And we saw God come through in different moments. I remember one time in particular, I believe I was a senior in high school. She'd had some good years, so it was kind of foreign to us to have her kind of be off. And so she, I don't know what it was at that time. I don't quite remember. I think the medicine just was not doing what it was supposed to do. She'd been on it for a very long time, and it just kind of, she just started to go off again, and we could see it. And I remember running to my bedroom and crumbling on my bed and just crying and being like, God, I can't do this again. And my dad came in and he said, you know what? And he was my youth pastor for many years. And he came in and he said, you know what? This is where it counts. We either believe that God is who he says he is right now, or we don't. And I remember agreeing with him and praying. And within a day or so, we saw her just snap like that back into normality. That was just one instance. My father tells a story of when she was first put into the hospital, and they had waited a very long time to get her in. They couldn't get her in. And she was almost in a comatose state. She couldn't carry on a conversation. She didn't know who anybody was, really. And he finally, after a really long day, got her admitted, and they were going to look after her. And the doctor said, you know what, this is going to be weeks before we see her well enough to have a conversation, well enough to talk to her about treatment and what that's going to look like. And my dad was newly saved at the time, and he drove home crying, just bawling, and he was praying, and he said, Lord, whatever you've given me, I don't want. Because if this is the life that you're going to put before me, I don't think I'm strong enough to do this. And at that point, he had people telling him, just take the baby and go. Just take her and go. There's no reason for you to stay. And he pulled into the driveway, and the phone rang, and he could hear it, and he had to run up the stairs to get to the phone and answer the phone. And he said, hello, and it was my mother on the other end of the line, and she said, John, what are you doing? And he said, I just got home. What are you doing? Are you okay? And she said, I'm just really tired. I'll talk to you tomorrow. And he hung up the phone, and he said, right there, he just crumbled. He said, Lord, I'll never doubt. I'll never ask again. If this is what you've put in front of me, I'll do it, and I'll do it to the best that I can. And, I remember just a few years ago, it's kind of like fast forward, as a mom, as a woman that doesn't have a mom to call and to look to and to, glean wisdom from, that left holes as I got to be an adult. And, when my son came, I felt like that was a breeze. I can do a boy. I was raised by a dad, more or less. Like, I could do a boy. When my daughter came along, if any of you know my daughter, well, there's, she's a trip. So she is. There's no other way to say it. She is feisty. And so one night, she's, Mom, come lay with me. And I wanted her to go to bed. And I really did not want to go lay with her. I was like so tired and so done. But I went anyway, and I laid next to her, and she finally snuggled up to me, and she was going to sleep, and her hand was on my chest. And the Holy Spirit spoke so clearly, and he said, when you were a kid, you didn't want this. You needed your mom in some capacity because you needed her to provide, food and clothing and just different things in the household. But she wasn't a mom in the sense of that security and that safe place. And she said, I've given you a daughter that not only needs you for those things, but I've given you a daughter that wants you. And the redemptive love of the Father is so good because he redeems those things that were taken. The book of Joel talks about restoring the years that the locusts have stolen from you. And I feel like that is just what the Father has done. And this past Tuesday was 4 months the day that my mom passed away. And so it was a weird week, if I'm honest. And I knew I was going to have to share today. And just thinking again about how redemptive the Father is, because a few of you know, but she was at home when she passed away. She was not in a mental facility, and she had lived in one for a few years. She would go home for the weekends. My dad was just talking about bringing her home for good. And my mom didn't even know it. She was just home for the weekend, thought she was just doing her thing. And she was at home, and she passed in her sleep. And it had nothing to do with her illness after 37 years. And when the enemy tried to take her out in suicide attempts, in, people walking away in isolation and loneliness, because I got stories about that too, the Father's redemptive. And my dad called me, and we were both crying on the phone. And he was just, I don't know what I could have done. And I said, Dad, I stopped him, and I said, Dad, you know what this means? He's like, what? I said, this is such a kick in the teeth to the kingdom of darkness because it didn't win. Yeah. The Father won. God won. He knew when and how he was going to take her. And she passed in her sleep, not out of torment, not out of, fear and anxiety. He took her when it was her time. And so that day she traded in her promise for the prize. And sometimes healing looks different than what we think it does because we prayed and we believed and we saw miracles and we saw things happen. And I will never take away, but medicine is a great gift. Doctors are a great gift. God is amazing, and he will do what he will. So in all of that, he's just so redemptive. Now, I'm okay. When I first gave birth to my son, family waited. They held their breath and were like, oh no, is this going to pass on? Well, it didn't. I'm okay. My kids are okay. If you know our family at all, you know that we should be a hot, hot mess when it comes to the family element. But the Father is redemptive, and instead he gives us people, he gives us children to hang out with and to love and to nurture. So he's so redemptive. So, if this hits a nerve in any of your hearts, just know that he's good. know that he's good. We sang Good, Good Father at my mom's celebration of life. And, I was able to sing it like I meant it because it was the truth. It doesn't matter what it has looked like for 37 years. It doesn't take away from who the Father is.
So good.
In just a couple moments, we're going to transition, and we're going to give you guys an opportunity to respond for ministry this morning. If you're going through a struggle, or if you know someone who is, you have a family member, you need prayer from one of these ladies or any of our ministry team that will also help us, I want you to come, and I want you to not leave without getting the help and the ministry that you need this morning. This is vital, and we're family, and it might take some bravery, but I believe you got it in you. And I hope that you trust us enough to be open and vulnerable to do that this morning. But before that, I want to give Liv another opportunity just to kind of share, because I think that this is going to help many of you just with her daily struggle. She's walking this out, and there is a wealth of information here, and she's not going to be able to get it all out, but she's definitely a resource for you for the future and for our church. But she's going to share a little bit now just of kind of like how she deals with this on a regular basis, and maybe even a little bit of help for you guys, and how we can be there and approach and love people who are going through these struggles.
Yeah, there's so much, again, I could share. But so kind of picking up where I left off, I am on a medication, and I have been for 6 or 7 months or 8, I don't know, however long since last December. And it really has absolutely changed my life. And so it's basically normalized certain levels to where I can function more normally and just be more functional. And so that doesn't mean that it's fixed me or that it's gone away or it's disappeared or gone forever, and I still walk through it. I still get anxiety. I still fall into depression or being highly emotional. So the way I kind of walk it out right now, there's a bunch of different things. There are so many tools and resources out there that will help. There are books, there are, blogs, just people's stories. I follow a lot of people that do struggle with their mental health, because they talk about it, and it's kind of a community. I do a lot of breathing exercises, and, if I do get in an anxious state, just like right now, or like when I was on stage, I don't know if you would know it, but my heart was racing. I was super hot, because I know I have something to release in the Lord, but because I have anxiety, it gets me really anxious. And so just breathing it out. There is this thing called cognitive behavioral therapy, where it's basically just, rerouting, these different mindsets and these different thoughts and turning them around. And it takes a lot of practice. So when I'm in an anxious state or an emotional state or whatever I'm going through, trying to recognize that, and, trying is the operative word, but it's the important word, trying to speak truth to the lies, speak life to the death, so that I can maybe, just get back up to normal a little bit. Having support and being open with my community. I share a lot on Instagram about my struggles, and I think that's really important because it not only helps other people, but it helps me get it out. Having my safe people, I like to call them, so my circle of people that I'll feel safe with that I can call on, letting them know, just really communicating like what it looks like, because a panic attack isn't just freaking out and walking around saying I need to go to the hospital. It can come in many, many different forms. I could get completely quiet and withdrawn, or, I could start talking a lot, or it just, there's so many different ways. And so explaining to people how you are when you're struggling with XYZ is really important, because then they know to come in and help you. I have a lot of like plan Bs. And so now that I'm on medication, I'm a lot more normalized. I'm able to do things that I couldn't before, or I would panic before, but there's still anxiety there. And so when I say plan B, I think, okay, where are my exits? Where are, is the car close? If this happens, what's my plan? What can I do? And that really helps, calm and really, it just gives me a sense of peace. There's a couple more things here because I don't want to forget. Meditation. And before anyone gets weird, it's not like Buddha. It's not like that. Meditation is just being in the moment. That's simply what it is. And anxiety is fear of the future. That's the simple definition. So I have this meditation app called Headspace, and it's this really wonderful British guy with the best voice in the world that just takes you through different things, and you really learn how to stay in the moment. And so practicing that, it kind of goes into my regular life, and I'm able to stop, and kind of collaborate and listen. Sorry, just kidding. I'm able to stop and try to, put myself back in the moment. Taking walks and staying active is super, super important, because your mind affects your body and vice versa. Just yesterday, I woke up feeling anxious. Literally nothing had happened yet. I just woke up and I felt anxious. And, I wanted to just numb myself with TV and just stay in bed all day. But I got up and I went to the store because I needed something, and just walking outside helped. Just the simplest thing can really, really help you. Breathe in the fresh air, and just moving your body. Knowing my triggers. And so you have to do a lot of work, you have to lean in and know what will cause certain things to happen. And so knowing my triggers, what's gonna maybe set off something in my brain so I can avoid those or work on them. And then I just started going back to therapy, which I think you guys heard last week or a couple weeks ago. And so that's amazing. If you have any questions on that or you want to go to therapy, please ask me. This place I go to is incredible. There are tons of therapists that are all wonderful, but I love mine. She's amazing. And just the fact of going, just the last couple of times, we haven't really dived super deep into stuff, but I've already gotten insight. I already feel so hopeful. And so that's kind of how I walk it out now. And that's not to say that I don't still feel those feelings of doubt or shame, that they don't creep in, because they do. But again, it's kind of just doing the best I can and doing the work I can to be the best me. So I had a thought, not just doing the things that will make me feel better in the moment, but doing the things that make me better. I had that thought earlier, so I wanted to share. Can I share one last story? Okay, just really quick. Blake and I went to Joshua Tree this last weekend, and we were climbing on rocks, bouldering, if you will. And I was really scared. I was really anxious, but I'm sick of that getting in the way of adventure. I'm done with that. So I tried anyway. And I feel a lot of anxiety with Blake's safety because things have happened to him. So that's the trauma I'm still working through. And so I was anxious for him. I was anxious for me. I don't want to fall off the rocks. My head goes to all these crazy places. And so anyway, there's this one jump that I was really, really scared to take. And I felt like I was going to throw up. I felt like I was going to cry, but I just really wanted to do it. And it wasn't even crazy. I'm not going to describe it because you're probably you would say it wasn't that bad. But I was really scared. And Blake just kept saying, you can do it. You can do it. I believe in you. Come on, just jump and fall forward. And so the wind was going really, really crazy and it was overwhelming me. And I was like, I just need the wind to stop. And literally it went shoo. And it just completely stopped. And I was like, okay, Jesus, now I got to do it. And so I'm revving myself up, again. And I didn't do a 1, 2, 3 jump. I just kept going until my body fell in line, with my mind. So I finally made the jump, instantly started crying, super emotional. But the point of that story is that after I did that, I was able to take on every single other boulder with so much more confidence. Like, I was so much more, it was so much easier, and it was so much fun, and I didn't want to leave, and it just felt so good. And I heard the Lord kind of download this to me, that once you break through one fear or one anxiety, what have you, that breaks through and opens up a new bravery in you. That opens up a new life inside of you. And I totally felt that in this physical context. And I know we're going long, but I just really wanted to share that. And so sometimes you can't push through, and that's okay. But sometimes when you can and you do, like, there is reward and there is hope.
Let's give it up for both Shelby and Liv. The point, God wants to heal, and your healing starts now.